Some silences don't bring peace. Some silences carry weight, like wet wool draped over your chest. They don't calm you. They choke you. I've been living in that kind of silence lately, the kind that makes your heart feel too loud, like it's beating in the wrong place. My name's David. I'm 30 years old, and until recently, I believed I had a family. A wife who loved me. A daughter who looked at me like I was the whole sky. And for a long time, I thought that was enough, that being a good man, a loyal man, meant something in this world. Claire and I met 7 years ago. I was working maintenance at an apartment complex in our city, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. She walked past me in the hallway one day, her arms full of grocery bags. I offered to help. She laughed and said she was stronger than she looked. I made some dumb joke, she actually smiled, and before I knew it, I was looking for excuses to fix things on her floor. She was sharp, opinionated, always put together. The kind of woman who made you want to stand a little straighter. She worked in office administration at a logistics firm. Said she liked control schedules, things that made sense. I was the opposite, more relaxed, more hands-on. I liked fixing things, doing work with my hands. We balanced each other. Or at least, that's what I thought. We moved fast. Moved in after 5 months, married after 11. People said we were rushing it, but I felt certain. When you know, right? The first year of marriage was golden. We were broke but happy, eating boxed mac and cheese on our couch and dreaming out loud. We'd make a list of baby names and cross them out when one of us changed our mind. She'd fall asleep on my chest with the TV still on. It felt like we were writing our own little story, one chapter at a time. Then Hannah came. Our daughter. Our light. I'll never forget holding her for the first time, the way her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. Claire was crying, and so was I. That night, I whispered promises to both of them while they slept. That I'd protect them. That I'd give them everything I had. That no matter how hard life got, I'd never leave. But I didn't know then how hard life would hit. Or how much a person could change when the winds turned cold. A couple years into our marriage, the pandemic hit, and like a lot of folks, I lost my job. The warehouse where I'd been doing equipment installs shut down overnight. One day I was putting in overtime, the next I was standing in line at the unemployment office, wondering how I'd tell Claire. She didn't take it well. I think at first she tried. She told me we'd figure it out, that we'd tighten our belts. But as the months dragged on, something in her shifted. She started working longer hours at her office. Came home late, tired, quiet. The kindness in her voice started fading, replaced by sighs and sideways comments. You've been home all day. You could have cleaned up. Do you even want to find a real job? I didn't sign up to carry this whole family. Those were the things she started saying. At first, I tried to explain. I told her I was trying. I was applying everywhere, factories, repair shops, even janitorial gigs. But without a high school diploma, let alone a GED, doors closed before they even opened. I wasn't lazy. I just didn't have the tools she did. She came from a different world, college degree, parents who paid her rent until she got her own place. Me? I was flipping burgers at 16, helping my mom pay for groceries. I never got to finish anything. Still, I kept pushing. I did food deliveries, car detailing, lawn work. Anything to bring in something. But nothing I did was ever enough for her. Our arguments got louder. She stopped apologizing after saying cruel things. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late. Maybe around 9. Hannah was playing with her stuffed giraffe, building some Lego tower on the living room floor. Claire and I were in the kitchen, arguing over some bill. I don't even remember which one, it didn't matter. What mattered was the heat in her voice, the poison in her words. She told me I was pathetic. That she should have married someone else. Someone with ambition. I snapped. I told her she didn't know what it meant to struggle. That she'd crumble if she had to do a week in my boots. Then she slapped me. Right there. In front of our daughter. The sound cracked through the house like a gunshot. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. She saw the look on my face, and for a second, I think she was scared. Not of me hurting her. I'd never lay a hand on anyone. But scared that I finally saw her for who she really was. Hannah dropped her giraffe. Claire didn't apologize. She didn't even seem sorry. She just turned away, like it was my fault for making her that angry. From that moment, something inside me calcified. The love didn't vanish, but it started to rot. Slowly. Quietly. Like termites in a foundation. And yet I stayed. For Hannah. Because I believed children should grow up in two-parent homes. Because I didn't want her to be one of those kids who shuttled between houses. Because, for better or worse, I still thought Claire and I could fix it. Until 2 days ago. That was the day everything broke for good. That was the day I came home early from a delivery shift, walked through the front door, and found my wife of 5 years on her knees in the kitchen, mouth full, cheeks red, and a stranger's belt on the floor beside her. She looked up. We locked eyes. And I swear to God, in that frozen moment, I felt every promise I'd ever made to her crack in half. She screamed. He pulled away, scrambling like a damn cockroach. I said nothing. I walked to the counter, picked up her car keys, and walked right back out. My daughter needed to be picked up from school. And unlike her mother, I still knew what my priorities were. I didn't cry that day. Not even when I was alone in the car with Hannah, her tiny voice chirping about her day at preschool like nothing in the world had changed. She was still wearing her paper crown from art class, talking about how she made a macaroni sun. I just nodded and smiled. Told her I was proud of her. Because what else do you say when your world is crumbling and your daughter is still too innocent to know it? We pulled into the drive-thru of some cheap fast food place. I think it was Arby's. I didn't care. I just needed somewhere that wasn't home. Somewhere with a booth, bright lights, and processed comfort. She got chicken nuggets. I got a roast beef sandwich I didn't even taste. But for those 20 or 30 minutes, I pretended it was a normal day. I even laughed when she spilled her drink and gasped like it was the end of the world. I grabbed napkins and wiped it up. Told her accidents happen. And for a little while, I could believe none of it was real. But eventually, the meal ended. Reality came crashing back. I stared at my phone. 1 missed call. 3 unread texts. All from Claire. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I love you. Please come home. Love. That word again. She loved me. Funny how people throw that word around like duct tape. Like it can fix anything as long as you say it with enough tears in your voice. Like, I love you, cancels out betrayal. Like it washes away the image of her on her knees for some office desk jockey while our daughter's crayon drawings sat 5 feet away on the fridge. I didn't respond. I couldn't. We got back in the car. I buckled Hannah in, drove us home, and pulled into our driveway to find a man sitting on the curb. Him. The guy from the kitchen. He looked like he hadn't moved since I left. Just hunched over, elbows on knees, staring at the sidewalk like it might give him answers. I parked. Got out. Didn't say a word. Just opened the back door and scooped Hannah up into my arms. She was half asleep. Whispered something about her toy giraffe, which she dropped in the car. I told her we'd find it later. I carried her inside. Put her in her bed. Tucked her in. Kissed her forehead. Then I stepped back outside. He was still there. He looked up at me, face pale, mouth twitching like he didn't know what to say. She said you were gone, he mumbled. I folded my arms, leaning against the side of the house. Gone? She said you moved to another state. That her ex-husband took off and left her with a kid. I stared at him. You believe that? He shook his head slowly. I didn't ask questions. Should've. I didn't even know she was married until you walked in. My fist clenched. I didn't even feel it at first, but my nails were digging into my palms. I wanted to hit him. Not because I thought he deserved it, but because I had no one else to hit. And pain, someone's pain, felt like the only fair exchange for what I'd seen. But I didn't swing. Instead, I asked him the same thing I'd asked Claire. How long? He flinched at the question. Swallowed. 3 months. 3 months. 90 days. A quarter of a year. That meant while I was driving 10 hours a day delivering groceries to stay afloat, she was screwing her coworker on the same tile floor I scrubbed clean every week. 3 months of lies. 3 months of her hugging me goodnight, and then texting him under the blanket beside me. 3 months of letting our daughter sit at the same table where she gave him head an hour earlier. Did you ever take her to your place? I asked. He shook his head. She wouldn't come. Said she didn't want to leave her kid alone. I laughed. Actually laughed. It sounded hollow in my throat. Oh, now she has morals. He looked ashamed. Like a dog that just realized its shit on the carpet. She said it was just sex, he added. That made me stop. Just sex. Just. You know, it'd almost be easier if she'd fallen in love with him. If she told me he was her soulmate, and they'd been secretly writing poetry to each other or planning an escape to Paris. Then maybe I could frame it as destiny. Something bigger than betrayal. But no. She threw away 5 years of marriage and a stable home for just sex. I should have walked away. But something in me, it wasn't mercy, it wasn't kindness, maybe it was pride, compelled me to give him a ride home. I didn't want him hanging around my neighborhood like some kicked-out dog. And truthfully, I didn't want Claire coming out and seeing me lose it in front of Hannah's bedroom window. So I told him to get in the car. We drove in silence for 20 minutes. Streetlights flickering by like ghosts. At one point he looked over and said, "She told me she never wanted to hurt anyone." I didn't respond. Because what do you say to that? At his apartment, he paused with his hand on the door handle. "I have a girlfriend," he muttered. I turned to him slowly. "You tell her," I said. "Or I will." His jaw tensed. "I don't know how." "You look her in the eyes," I interrupted, voice low. "You tell her what you did. Don't let her find out the way I did. Because no one deserves that." He gave me a quiet nod and got out. I watched him disappear into the building. Then I drove home. Back to the house I used to call mine. Claire's car wasn't there. Good. I stepped inside. The silence had weight again. Hannah stirred in her sleep. I sat by her bed, brushed her hair back, and watched her breathe. My daughter. My reason. My focus. And at that moment, one thing became crystal clear. Claire wasn't going to get away with this. Not with a sob story. Not with crocodile tears. Not with some plea for forgiveness. I was going to burn down everything she thought she had left. Starting with her lies. And ending with her daughter. Because I was going to take full custody. And leave Claire with nothing. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on the living room couch, my old spot, back when Claire and I still called this house a home. The ceiling fan spun in slow circles above me, a low mechanical hum filling the silence. I didn't bother turning on the lights. Didn't bother brushing my teeth or changing into pajamas. I just sat in that dark room, shirt damp with sweat, fists clenched on my stomach, trying to process the wreckage Claire had turned our life into. I kept hearing it. The way she screamed my name when I caught her. The slap she gave me weeks ago in front of our daughter. The sharp, soulless way she'd started talking to me once I lost my job. I replayed every moment I missed, every sign I ignored. How she started wearing more perfume to work. How she started staying late. The way she started locking her phone like it held state secrets. My whole marriage had become a lie, and now that I had seen the truth with my own 2 eyes, I wasn't going to be the man who just cried into a beer and moved out. No. Claire wasn't just going to face the consequences, she was going to drown in them. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The scene from earlier still haunted me, the memory of her kneeling there, hair mussed, cheeks flushed. I couldn't even look at the floor without seeing her silhouette. Like a stain I couldn't scrub out. I grabbed the mop and a bucket of hot water and bleach. I didn't clean the floor for her. I did it for me. Because if I had to spend one more second walking across the same ground where she'd destroyed my trust, I'd burn the whole damn room down. I mopped until the floor smelled like chemicals and my knuckles were white from gripping the handle. The water turned murky gray. My reflection stared back at me in it, dark circles under my eyes, jaw tight. I looked like a man who'd seen combat. And in a way, I had. The next morning, I made Hannah breakfast: eggs, toast, orange slices. She giggled when I accidentally dropped the toast and cursed under my breath. "You said a grown-up word," she said with a smile, swinging her feet under the table. I forced a laugh, sat down beside her, and kissed her head. "Don't tell anyone," I whispered. She didn't know anything. That innocence was both a blessing and a heartbreak. Because sooner or later, I was going to have to explain why Mommy wasn't around as much anymore. And I already knew how I was going to frame it. Mommy made a choice. And choices have consequences. After I dropped her off at daycare, I drove straight to a law firm downtown. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but I kept repeating the same words in my head: she doesn't get to take her from me. She doesn't get to ruin everything. The receptionist barely looked up when I walked in. I was in jeans and a faded hoodie, hair messy, beard untrimmed. I didn't care about appearances. Not anymore. I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here to start a war. I met with a family lawyer named Grant Morrison. Early 50s, sharp eyes, didn't blink much. He listened as I told him what happened. The affair. The slap. The lies. The man in my house. The job loss. My daughter. I laid it all out in clinical, brutal detail. He asked questions. Took notes. Didn't interrupt. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and said, "We have options." Those 3 words hit me like a shot of adrenaline. First, full custody. He said we had a strong case, especially with the physical altercation and Claire's infidelity happening in front of the child. Courts don't look kindly on that. Add in the instability she introduced into the home, and we'd make a compelling argument that Hannah deserved to stay with me. Second, the house. Even though it was in both our names, I'd been paying the bulk of the mortgage for years, and with her affair being the reason for separation, I could push for buyout or retention. Grant said the courts are more sympathetic when infidelity is this clearly documented. Third, assets. Her car? In her name. But the savings account? Joint. She'd been funneling money into it for months without my knowledge, probably to prepare for leaving me once her affair went further. But if I acted quickly, froze the account, and filed properly, I could make sure she didn't walk away with more than she deserved. Which, in my opinion, was nothing. I told Grant I wanted it all. Custody. The house. The car, if I could swing it. I didn't want Claire left with a soft pillow to land on. She'd made a choice. She brought another man into our home, into our lives, and lied about it for 3 months. That wasn't a mistake. That was a campaign. A conscious, calculated betrayal. And if she thought I was just going to sit back and let her keep weekends with Hannah, she was out of her mind. I paid the consultation fee and walked out of that office feeling like I had steel in my bones. This wasn't going to be easy. But it was going to be necessary. I owed it to Hannah. I owed it to the man I used to be, the man Claire buried under all her lies. When I got home, I finally unlocked my phone. Claire had sent another string of texts. "Please talk to me. Can we meet? Just talk. For Hannah's sake." I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I laughed bitterly at that last one. So I texted back. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Don't contact me again unless it's through legal counsel. You've made your choices. Now live with them." Seconds later, she tried to call. I declined. She texted again. I blocked her number. That night I slept in my bed. Alone. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was finally learning how to swim. The next time I saw Claire, it was 2 days later, and by then, I had already made up my mind about the kind of man I needed to become. I was done being the version of myself who clung to decency out of habit, who bit his tongue to avoid confrontation, who sacrificed his dignity for the illusion of peace. That man, the one who endured the slap in front of his daughter without retaliating, who tried to believe a lie because the truth was too painful, was dead and buried now. What remained in his place was someone colder, sharper, less patient, and more dangerous, because I now understood that decency had no place in a battlefield, and make no mistake, Claire had declared war the moment she unzipped that stranger's pants in our kitchen. I heard her before I saw her, which was fitting, because her voice had become something I dreaded long before I realized why. I was sitting on the living room couch, Hannah napping upstairs, when I heard her car pull into the driveway. The familiar crunch of tires over gravel. The hurried footsteps up the porch. The rustle of keys, which stopped short when she realized I'd changed the locks the night before. Then came the knock, measured, tentative, like she wasn't sure whether she was welcome or not. She wasn't. "David," she called, voice muffled behind the door. "Please, can we talk?" I didn't move. Didn't speak. I let her stand out there for a full minute before I finally rose, walked to the door, and opened it just enough to meet her eyes. She looked like hell. Her hair was frizzy and unwashed, her eyes red-rimmed and glassy, the makeup she used to be so meticulous about now smeared across her face like a child's crayon drawing. She looked like someone who had been crying for hours, maybe days, and I'll admit, there was a time when that would have torn something in me apart. But that time was gone. Now I looked at her and felt nothing but cold, clean fury. "I told you not to come here," I said, my voice low but firm. She blinked, tears swelling at the corners of her eyes. "I had to. You're not answering my texts. You blocked my number. I didn't know what else to do." "That's because there's nothing else to do," I replied, stepping forward so she had no choice but to back off the porch. "This isn't your home anymore, Claire. You lost that privilege when you invited another man inside it. And now you're going to face the consequences." Her lips trembled. I wasn't thinking straight. "I didn't, David, it wasn't supposed to happen like that. No one ever plans betrayal like a calendar event," I snapped. "They just do it. Then they cry afterward like it means something. But tears don't erase what I saw. They don't make you less of a liar. And they sure as hell don't make you a fit mother." That last line hit her hard. She recoiled like I'd slapped her, her hands flying to her chest, her voice rising in panic. "Don't you dare say I'm not a good mother," she gasped. "I love our daughter." "Do you?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Because you sure didn't look like a mother when you were bent over the kitchen counter with your office buddy. You didn't seem too concerned about what would happen if Hannah had walked in instead of me. You didn't look like someone who loved her family. You looked like someone who was ready to burn it to the ground for a cheap thrill." She started sobbing then, hard, ugly sobs that made her whole body shake. She dropped to the porch steps, buried her face in her hands, and wailed like she was the one who'd been betrayed. It was grotesque. Almost theatrical. I stood there watching her for a moment, unmoved, before turning and stepping back inside the house. She scrambled up behind me, hand outstretched, but I held up a warning finger. "Don't take another step into this house. You're trespassing." "But I need to see Hannah," she cried. "Please, David, she's my daughter too." "Then you should have thought about that before you broke this family apart," I said, slamming the door in her face. I stood there for a long while afterward, forehead resting against the cool wood, listening as her cries faded into silence, then into the low rumble of her car engine as she drove away. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no sense of victory, no satisfaction. There was only resolve, pure and unwavering. I was going to protect my daughter. I was going to take back everything Claire had tried to steal from me. And I was going to make damn sure she regretted ever thinking she could cheat and get away with it. That night, I pulled out every file I had, bank statements, mortgage documents, car insurance, daycare forms. I sat at the kitchen table until midnight organizing our life into two separate piles, what was hers, and what was mine. The list of things she was entitled to was remarkably short. The next morning, I met with Grant again. I handed him the documents, told him what happened at the house, and asked how quickly we could push things forward. He smiled, nodded, and said he'd draw up the first draft of the custody filing and emergency orders. With what we had, we could request a no-contact order until the court hearing. Claire wouldn't be allowed near the house or Hannah until the judge said otherwise. I signed everything. And when I left that office, I didn't look back. I went home, picked up Hannah from daycare, and took her to the park. We played on the swings. She made me chase her across the grass until I was out of breath. We sat under the jungle gym and shared a juice box while she babbled about cartoons and bugs and clouds shaped like puppies. It was the best day I'd had in years. And as I watched her laugh, I made myself another promise. Claire had taken enough from me. She was never going to take my daughter. Not while I was still breathing. 3 days after I filed the custody petition, Claire's mother showed up at my doorstep, dressed like she was heading to church instead of the house her daughter blew up. The sun was just starting to set, casting long shadows on the front lawn where Hannah had been playing with her sidewalk chalk, completely unaware of how much her world was shifting underneath her. I stepped outside and closed the front door behind me before the woman even made it halfway up the porch, because the last thing I was going to let happen was any conversation like this happening within earshot of my daughter. Claire's mother, Linda, looked like she hadn't slept, and judging from the way she clutched her purse like a lifeline, she wasn't there to raise hell. Still, I didn't let my guard down. I'd learned the hard way that just because someone shared blood with you didn't mean they were capable of loyalty. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off before she could even try the soft approach. If you're here to defend her, I said, voice like stone, you can save your breath. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she sighed, almost like she'd rehearsed it in the car. I'm not here to defend Claire, she said finally. I'm here because I don't know what else to do, and she's not making any sense. She's staying with one of her coworkers and crying every night. She won't eat. She keeps saying she ruined everything. And, David, she's scared you're going to take her daughter away forever. She's right, I said. No hesitation. No softening. Because that's exactly what I intend to do. Linda flinched like I'd slapped her, but she didn't argue. Instead, she took a careful step forward, her eyes searching mine like maybe she could find some leftover piece of the man who used to bring her flowers on Mother's Day. David, she said, voice trembling just slightly. I know what she did was unforgivable, but Hannah. She stopped being a mother the moment she decided her family was less important than whatever she was getting from that man. I interrupted, tone sharp enough to slice. You want to talk about unforgivable? Let's talk about how she slapped me in front of our daughter and never once apologized. Let's talk about how she lied to me for months while letting some guy screw her on the same counters we baked birthday cupcakes on. Let's talk about how she told that man I didn't even live here, that she was a single mother, how she erased me from my own goddamn life just so she could keep getting off after work. Linda's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw her facade crack. She didn't know all of it, not the extent, not the coldness of it. Claire hadn't told her about the lie. About the way she had rewritten our family history just to make her cheating more convenient. Linda opened her mouth, but no words came. Only silence. Good. I stepped down from the porch, closing the distance between us until she had no choice but to meet my gaze straight on. I don't hate you, I said quietly. You've always been kind to me. But if you think I'm going to let that woman anywhere near my daughter without a fight, you're wrong. She made a choice. Now I'm making mine. I'm not saying she should be let off the hook, Linda whispered. I'm not. But she's still Hannah's mother. No, I said, shaking my head. She's just the woman who gave birth to her. Being a mother is about sacrifice. It's about love. It's about choosing your child over your own selfish wants every single time. Claire failed that test the second she let a stranger put his hands on her while our little girl was just a school pickup away. Do you have any idea what would have happened if I hadn't come home early that day? What if I hadn't shown up? What if Hannah had walked in first? Do you understand the kind of damage that could have done to her? Linda covered her mouth, tears slipping out from under her lashes. I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted. I was done being the man who comforted people who only showed up when it was too late. I turned to go back inside, hand on the doorknob, when she called out one last time. If it were you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. If you were the one who messed up, would you want forgiveness? I froze for a second, thinking about that. About the idea of making a mistake so severe that it shattered everything. About the possibility of regret, of redemption. But I realized something in that pause, a truth I hadn't said aloud until now. I would never have done to her what she did to me. I said finally, without turning around. So no, I don't want forgiveness. I want justice. Then I opened the door and walked inside. That night, I took Hannah out for ice cream. Not because there was a celebration, not because anything was okay, but because she needed moments that felt normal. She giggled when the scoop of vanilla started dripping down her cone and onto her shirt, and I wiped her chin while telling her she looked like a mess. She called me Daddy the Napkin Man, and I laughed harder than I had in weeks. But as she climbed into bed later, curled up with her giraffe, I sat by her side and watched her sleep, and the bitterness crept back in. This little girl had no idea how much I was going to have to fight to keep her safe. How her mother, the same one who once sang lullabies to her in the kitchen, was now the single greatest threat to her emotional safety. And tomorrow, when Claire received the official paperwork from Grant's office, she would finally understand that her choices had cost her everything. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protection. It was about taking back what she tried to destroy. The official paperwork was delivered to Claire the next morning, and I knew it the moment I heard my phone buzz with a blocked number and saw 5 back-to-back missed calls in the span of 10 minutes. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of that phone. Claire would be standing in someone else's apartment, probably still wearing one of her office blouses that looked professional from the neck down but left just enough undone at the top to draw the wrong kind of attention, holding the packet of legal documents with trembling hands and trying to figure out how everything had slipped so far out of her control. She would read the bold letters at the top, petition for emergency temporary custody, and then her eyes would scan down the page to the allegations. Emotional instability. Physical assault in front of a minor. Evidence of ongoing infidelity in the shared family home. Request for restricted visitation, supervised by a court-appointed advocate. Each sentence would hit her like a wave, and by the time she got to the last page, the realization would bloom in her chest like a fire she couldn't put out. I was serious. Dead serious. And this time, there were no soft landings. By noon, I received a voicemail from her. I didn't listen to it. I forwarded it straight to Grant, who had already instructed me to document and save every message, every call, every word she tried to use to claw her way back into my life. This was ammunition now. This was proof that she couldn't respect boundaries, that even with a pending legal order, she believed she could just cry her way out of this like she had every other mess she'd created. At 4 that afternoon, I saw her car parked across the street. Not on my driveway. Not at the curb in front of the house. No, she'd gone one step lower, parking in front of my neighbor's place, probably hoping to catch a glimpse of Hannah through the windows, like some desperate ghost haunting a life she'd set fire to. I watched from the upstairs window, not moving, not giving her anything. And after 10 minutes, she drove off again. That night, Hannah asked me why Mommy didn't come home anymore. It wasn't the first time she asked, but it was the first time I didn't try to dodge the question. I sat on the edge of her bed, her little hand curled around mine, her eyes wide and waiting for an answer that wouldn't break her the way her mother's betrayal had broken me. Mommy made some choices, I began, voice low and steady. And sometimes, when people make bad choices, they need to take time to understand what they did wrong. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you. But right now, it's my job to make sure you're safe and happy, and that means Mommy and I have to live in different places for a while." She nodded slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just accepted it with the kind of heartbreaking calm only children are capable of, because when the people they trust the most are in pain, they learn to carry that silence too. 2 days later, I got a call from Grant. Claire had filed a response. She wasn't contesting the affair, she couldn't, not with everything we had, but she was denying the physical abuse. She claimed she'd never laid a hand on me. That there had never been a slap. That Hannah had never been present for anything more than verbal disagreements. She tried to spin it as stress, as misunderstanding, as the unraveling of a marriage due to financial strain. She framed herself as the sole provider, the overwhelmed wife trying to hold things together while her unemployed husband spiraled into bitterness and paranoia. She accused me of emotional manipulation, of coldness, of neglect. "She's painting herself as the victim," Grant said with a sigh that told me he'd seen it all before. "It's textbook. But don't worry, we have enough to dismantle that narrative piece by piece. Especially if we can get that man she was with to cooperate." I hadn't spoken to him since the night I dropped him off, but now it felt necessary. Not for vengeance, but for clarity. I needed him to put into words exactly what Claire had done. I needed someone outside this hell to confirm that I wasn't insane, that what I'd seen, what I'd endured, was real. I found his number in my call history and dialed. It rang 5 times before he picked up. "Yeah?" His voice was hesitant, guarded. "It's David," I said. "We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet sigh. "I figured you'd call eventually." We met at a gas station off the highway. Neutral ground. I didn't want him near my house, and I had no intention of inviting him into any space that had ever belonged to me. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. Greasy hair, dark shadows under his eyes. He approached like a man walking into a confession booth, except I wasn't there to absolve him. "I already told you everything I knew," he said, hands buried in the pockets of his jacket. "I need it in writing," I replied. "A statement. That she told you she was single. That she claimed her ex-husband lived in another state. That you never knew she was still married until I walked in and caught you." He shifted uncomfortably, then nodded. "I'll write it. I owe you that much." "You owe Hannah that much," I said, and his face darkened with shame. He handed me a folded envelope. "It's all there. I wrote it the day after. I didn't know if I'd have the guts to send it." I took the envelope, shoved it in my coat pocket, and walked back to my car without another word. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need closure. I needed the truth on paper. Because Claire wasn't going to win this by rewriting history. She was going to lose, piece by piece, to the reality she tried to bury. And I was going to be the one to make sure she never forgot it. The morning of the court hearing arrived with the kind of gray, oppressive weather that felt oddly fitting for the moment, like even the sky was refusing to look either of us in the eye. I stood outside the courthouse in a suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding, drinking stale coffee from a vending machine and going over everything Grant had prepared. He met me on the courthouse steps, sharp as ever in his charcoal gray jacket, and greeted me with a nod that carried more weight than words could. "She's inside," he said, glancing toward the front entrance. "With her lawyer. They're keeping quiet, but I wouldn't be surprised if she tries to make a statement." I gave a short nod. "Let her talk. The more she says, the deeper she digs." We moved inside, past the metal detectors and echoing marble hallways that made every step feel like it mattered more than it did. The courtroom itself was modest, not the kind of grand, echoing chamber you see in movies. Just a few wooden benches, a raised bench for the judge, and the kind of dim lighting that made everything feel smaller, more personal, more final. Claire sat at the far end, flanked by a lawyer who looked barely older than a grad student, flipping nervously through a binder of paperwork. She didn't look up at me when I entered, but I didn't need to see her face to know how hollow she must have felt in that moment. When she finally did glance up, just before the judge entered, our eyes locked. Her gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't even pleading. It was vacant. A hollow echo of the woman I had once loved, once believed in, once stood beside when we both whispered our wedding vows like secrets. She looked more like a stranger in a familiar mask, and in that second, something in me finally disconnected. The last frayed thread of sentiment snapped, and I no longer saw my wife. I only saw the woman who had endangered our daughter's sense of security for 3 months of deceit and lust disguised as a moment of weakness. The judge entered, a firm-looking woman in her early 60s, all no-nonsense posture and clear, clipped enunciation. She wasted no time in getting to the heart of the matter, and I respected that. This wasn't about grandstanding. This was about our child. About what kind of future she was going to have. Grant stood and delivered his opening statement with the kind of calm, composed confidence that made me grateful I'd chosen him. He didn't try to paint Claire as a monster, he simply presented the facts with precision and care. The affair, the slap, the atmosphere of instability, the false claims made to her affair partner, and most importantly, the risk those behaviors posed to a young, impressionable child. Then came the part one had been waiting for, when the judge allowed the statement from the man Claire had slept with to be read into the record. Grant handed over the envelope I had received, and as the judge read it silently, Claire finally shifted. I watched her grip the edge of the table like the wood might somehow save her from drowning. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something that made her shake her head violently. She was unraveling, thread by thread, and I kept my gaze steady, never looking away. When it came time for her lawyer to speak, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. His voice trembled slightly. His arguments were full of caveats and hypotheticals, dancing around the reality that stood in the room like a statue of betrayal. He tried to position Claire as a woman under extreme stress, a working mother burdened with emotional weight after her husband's job loss, isolated by the pandemic, driven to a lapse in judgment. He acknowledged an inappropriate relationship, but argued it didn't make her an unfit mother. Then Claire spoke. She stood slowly, shoulders hunched as if gravity itself was trying to crush her. Her voice was thin, but it echoed clearly in the small courtroom. "I made a mistake," she began, her eyes focused somewhere over the judge's head. "I don't have an excuse. I can't explain what I did in a way that makes it okay, because there is no way to make it okay. I hurt my husband. I hurt our daughter. I lied. I betrayed everything we built together. But I never stopped loving Hannah. I never stopped being her mother. And I'm asking the court not to take that away from me." For a brief moment, the room was silent. Her lawyer looked surprised, maybe because she had gone off script. Grant said nothing. I didn't flinch. When the judge finally spoke, her words were firm but fair. She acknowledged the severity of Claire's actions, the impact of her choices on the child's environment, and the clear evidence of emotional and physical instability. But she also acknowledged Claire's remorse, her willingness to admit fault, and her lack of prior incidents. The result: I was granted temporary full custody, with Claire allowed only supervised visitation twice a month, under review in 90 days. It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was a beginning. A clear signal that the system wasn't going to turn a blind eye to betrayal simply because a few tears were shed. As I walked out of the courtroom, Grant beside me, Claire remained seated at her table, her head in her hands. Outside, the clouds had cleared slightly. The sun didn't shine, exactly, but there was a glow behind the gray. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I sent one text to Claire's number, unblocked for this moment only. "Do not come near my house. Your visitations will be scheduled through the advocate's office. If you try anything else, I'll see you back in court." I meant every word I said. I hit send. Then I blocked the number again. That night, I took Hannah out for dinner, just the two of us. She chose pancakes, even though it wasn't breakfast. We sat in a booth under buzzing neon lights while she told me a story about a dragon and a rainbow slide, her words tumbling over each other like they couldn't come out fast enough. I laughed. I listened. I watched her small hands move with wild gestures as she spoke, and I thought about how close I'd come to losing these moments. How easily they could have slipped through my fingers if I'd chosen to look the other way. I wouldn't let Claire near this life again, not unless she proved herself, not unless she rebuilt from ashes what she had so carelessly burned. And even then, I'd never forget what she did. In the weeks that followed the court's decision, a strange quiet settled into the house, one that, while unfamiliar at first, slowly grew into something resembling peace. The kind of peace that doesn't arrive with trumpets or bright declarations, but creeps in subtly, like sunlight through a curtain after a long night. It was the peace of knowing that, for once, control had been wrested back from the chaos, that boundaries had been drawn and were being upheld, and that for the first time in months, I was not constantly holding my breath, waiting for the next lie to unravel, or the next betrayal to blindside me. Claire didn't try to defy the order. Not directly. She followed the visitation schedule to the letter, never early, never late, never attempting any last-minute changes or surprise requests. I suspected this wasn't due to respect for the court but rather her lawyer's stern warning about how quickly she could lose even the little she had been granted. Her visits with Hannah took place at a child advocacy center 10 miles away, a bright building filled with soft rugs, plastic toys, and clipboard-wielding professionals trained to monitor the delicate interactions between estranged parents and confused children. It wasn't warm. It wasn't comfortable. But it was safe, and that was all I cared about. The first time I dropped Hannah off there, she looked up at me from her car seat with uncertainty on her face, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. "Why do I have to see Mommy in a new place?" she asked, her voice soft, unsure whether she was being punished or whether the world had simply changed again without warning. I didn't give her the sugar-coated version. She was too smart for that, even at 4. "Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love," I said, watching her process each word carefully. "And when that happens, other grown-ups help us make sure everyone is safe. This place is one of those places." She nodded, not entirely understanding, but trusting me enough to accept it. And when I picked her up an hour later, her first words were about the fish tank in the waiting room, not about Claire. That said more to me than she ever could with a speech. Claire never looked me in the eye during those exchanges. She would arrive a few minutes after I dropped Hannah off and leave a few minutes before I picked her up, almost as if trying to avoid the full weight of what her life had become. If she was ashamed, she kept it buried. If she was angry, she knew better than to show it. But there was something else beneath her carefully composed face each time I saw her from a distance, an emptiness, a haunted sort of stillness that suggested she was beginning to understand that her apology, her regret, her sobbed declarations of love, all of it, meant nothing anymore. She had broken something that could not be put back together. And she was beginning to realize that once respect is gone, love becomes a souvenir, something you keep in a box but never carry with you again. I didn't hate her. At least, not in the way most people define hate. What I felt for Claire was deeper, colder, a sort of righteous detachment born from betrayal too severe to forgive. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't fantasize about her suffering. But I didn't wish her happiness either. I wished her silence. I wished her distance. I wished her the long, slow realization of what she had thrown away, and the knowledge that it wasn't coming back, not this year, not next, not ever. When I wasn't managing drop-offs or responding to Grant's updates on the court proceedings, I focused every ounce of my energy on Hannah. I took on more delivery hours, used the downtime to study for my GED, and started filling out applications for trade schools nearby. It was hard. Some days I was exhausted. But I had purpose now, a fire in my gut that wouldn't let me sit still. Every box of groceries I carried, every late-night run across the city, every test prep question I answered, was one step closer to giving Hannah the kind of stability her mother had so carelessly gambled away. And as I worked, I watched my daughter begin to heal. I saw it in the way she started singing to herself again while coloring. In how she asked to make pancakes together on Sunday mornings. In the way she curled up against me on the couch with her giraffe and whispered, "I like our house better now." That one broke me a little. Not because of the words, but because of the truth in them. Even at 4 she felt the shift. Even at 4 she knew what peace was. Claire's supervised visitation reports, when they came, were as uneventful as I expected. The court-appointed advocate noted her being appropriately engaged and emotionally sensitive, but also remarked on moments of awkwardness and strained affection, particularly in the second and third sessions. Hannah had asked to end the last visit 10 minutes early, complaining of a tummy ache. The advocate gently suggested that Hannah appeared to grow more distant with each visit, not hostile, but withdrawn, polite in the way children get when they sense something isn't right but can't find the words to say so. Claire's lawyer must have seen the same reports, because a week later I got an email, an offer to meet outside of court. Not for reconciliation, not for romantic negotiation, but for what her lawyer described as a mutually beneficial parenting arrangement. I read the words over twice before laughing bitterly into my coffee. Now she wanted to talk? Now that her position had been weakened, her bond with her daughter fading by the week? Now she was looking for terms? Grant advised we decline for now. "Let the process unfold," he said. "Every day she remains distant, the stronger your case becomes. Let her prove her regret isn't just reactionary." And I agreed. Because whatever Claire wanted to say now, it was too late. Words had become worthless currency. The only language I respected anymore was action. And her actions had already delivered the message loud and clear. She had failed as a wife. She had failed as a partner. And slowly, visit by visit, report by report, she was failing as a mother too. I never thought I would see the day where I'd be referred to as primary caregiver on legal paperwork, where forms would label Claire as non-custodial parent and require supervised visits monitored by a neutral third party. But that day came sooner than I expected, and when it did, I didn't feel triumphant or victorious, just hollow and resolute, like a soldier walking alone through the ruins of a city he used to love, too tired to celebrate, too wise to mourn. By the time the 90-day review hearing arrived, everything that needed to be said had already been written down, cross-examined, and submitted. The reports from the visitation center were consistent and damning. They painted a picture of a mother trying her best to reach a child who was no longer emotionally reachable to her. Not because of malice, not because of manipulation, but because something unspoken had shifted in Hannah, something deep and instinctual that told her which parent made her feel safe, and which parent had broken something they couldn't repair. The child psychologist assigned to review our case, a warm but assertive woman with a background in trauma-informed therapy, stated clearly in her affidavit that Hannah had formed a primary emotional bond with me, and while she did not display overt hostility toward Claire, there were clear signs of detachment and guarded behavior during each supervised session. She recommended that full custody remain with me, and that any future increase in visitation should be decided at Hannah's pace, not the court's, not Claire's, not mine. When the judge delivered her ruling, she didn't raise her voice or pound a gavel. She simply stated the facts, line by line, like reading the final chapter of a story no one wanted to write. Full physical and legal custody awarded to me. Supervised visitation to continue at the discretion of the appointed child advocate. Any changes to this arrangement would require Claire to demonstrate not just compliance, but sustained emotional readiness and a proven effort to rebuild trust over time. Claire didn't speak as the judge finished. She sat there in her neatly pressed blouse and blazer, her makeup subtle but carefully applied, like she still believed the right presentation might somehow rewrite the past. But her eyes were hollow. They didn't rise to meet mine, not even once. She looked smaller than I remembered, like someone who'd been shrinking inside herself for months and was only now realizing how little of her remained. Afterward, as I gathered my papers and stood to leave, she rose too, slowly, and for a moment I thought she might try to speak to me. But she didn't. She walked toward me, hesitated, then turned toward Grant instead. "I know I'm not allowed to talk to him directly," she said softly, But could you please tell him something for me? Grant didn't blink. That depends what it is. Claire's voice cracked. Tell him. I understand now. I understand what I did. And I won't fight anymore. I'll do whatever's best for Hannah. Even if that means she never wants to see me again. I left without saying a word. Weeks passed. The court ruling set in like cement. Claire didn't contest anything further. She attended her scheduled visitations, though Hannah often chose to end them early. She sent small gifts through the advocate's office, stickers, coloring books, the occasional card with too many hearts drawn on the envelope. I let Hannah open them if she wanted. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. I never pushed. My life, meanwhile, began to take on a strange sort of rhythm. I woke early. I packed lunches. I braided hair, tied shoes, washed clothes, cooked dinner, paid bills. I studied for my GED at night and enrolled in a welding certification program that began in the fall. My days were full, sometimes exhausting, but filled with clarity, because now, everything I did had a purpose. Everything I did pointed toward one simple truth: I would never let anyone jeopardize my daughter's stability again. Not even her own mother. Friends started calling again. Some of them had heard whispers of what happened. Others had stayed quiet, unsure of what to say. I let them back into my life slowly. On my terms. I wasn't interested in pity. I didn't want to rehash the past over beers or trade war stories about cheating partners. What I wanted, what I needed, was the quiet solidarity of people who respected my pain without trying to own it. One afternoon, as I was helping Hannah with her alphabet puzzle, she looked up and asked, "Are we a happy family now?" I paused, my hand hovering over the letter K. "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes. "We're a happy family." She smiled and went back to her puzzle, content with the answer. And in that moment I realized something I hadn't dared to believe until now, that maybe, just maybe, happiness didn't have to look like what I lost. Maybe it could look like what I still had. Maybe it could look like pancakes on Sundays, bedtime stories whispered under a blanket, giggles in the grocery store, and tiny hands squeezing mine tighter than they ever had before. Claire had sent me a letter during that time. Not through a lawyer. Not through the court. Just an envelope with my name on it, slid under my front door one evening while I was out back watering the garden with Hannah. I didn't read it that night. I didn't read it for a week. But when I finally opened it, sitting alone in the kitchen after Hannah had gone to sleep, I found a letter filled with words that might have mattered once, but no longer did. She talked about her regret, her shame, her realization that what she'd done wasn't just a lapse in judgment but the result of years of selfish thinking and buried resentment. She said she saw now that I had been trying, really trying, to build something real, even when the world made it hard. She admitted that her affair wasn't about love or connection, but about distraction, about feeding the emptiness she refused to name. And she ended it by saying she didn't expect forgiveness, only understanding. And that she hoped, one day, Hannah would give her a chance to earn a place in her life again. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer I never opened again. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because Claire didn't get to choose what she lost anymore. That power belonged to me now. And I had already taken everything back.